So I wanted to do a video on the Binding of Isaac for a long time because it's one of those stories in the Bible which I just cannot make any sense of whatsoever. Um, I wanted to wait until I could make sense of it, but apparently I'm not going to be able to. So let me just start off by reading through the story. Okay, let's take a look at exactly what we're talking about here. I'm going to be using this translation by Robert Alter. He just came out with a translation of the five books of Moses, and it's a wonderful translation. And I think it'll kind of aid us in understanding a little bit more of how bizarro the story is if we use a translation which is not the same translation that we've been listening to our whole life. In addition, he gives a lot of really good commentary on the story here. So it's just a very small story. So first thing, let's do some setting here. This is pretty much the last thing that you see Abraham do in his life. There's only one more thing he does in the book of Genesis, and that is he gets a burial plot for his wife Sarah, and then that's the last you ever hear from Abraham. So what is this all about? Well, it's found in Genesis chapter 22, and I'll start reading at verse 1 and continuing. And it happened after these things that God tested Abraham. And he said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Take, pray, your son, your only one, whom you love, Isaac, and go forth into the land of Moriah, and offer him up as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will show you. And Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took his two lads with him, and Isaac his son. And he split wood for the offering, and rose and went to the place that God had said to him. Okay, so already it's just like completely baffling what's going on here, right? I mean, it's just mystery upon mystery upon mystery. Let's start back here at the first verse. Or verse 2, take, pray your son, your only one whom you love, Isaac. Abraham has two sons at this point, right? There's a nice note in the commentary here on this. It's kind of like we're hearing only one side of the telephone conversation here. We're hearing God's side, but we're not really hearing Abraham's side. And let me read the midrash of I suppose it's a rabbi named Rashi who did this. It's in the notes here. He said to him, take your son, your only son. And then Abraham says, well, I have two sons. And then God says, the one that you love. And he says, I love both my sons. And then he says, Isaac. So in other words, God is kind of narrowing it down here. It's like it's kind of interesting. God is telling Abraham to kill his son, but God is in a sense already saying your other son is completely dead to you. You don't even have another son. This is the only son that you have, and I'm going to kill him now. Very bizarre. I don't get it. Okay. And, look at what Abraham does here, right? Abraham takes Isaac. When I was told this story in Sunday school, I was told as Isaac is just so trusting of his father, and, Isaac's just trusting in God and his father, and he just will lay himself down on the altar, all this kind of stuff, right? Dudes, Abraham went heavy here, okay? It wasn't just Abraham and Isaac who went and did this. Okay, so Abraham took two other dudes with him, okay? In case Isaac wasn't just so eager to please, as it says, right? All right, at any rate, let's continue reading here. On the third day, Abraham raised his eyes, and he saw the place from afar. And Abraham said to his lad, Sit here with the donkey, and let me and the lad walk ahead of us, and worship and return to you. And Abraham took the wood for the offering, and put it on Isaac his son, and he took his hand in the fire and the cleaver, and the two of them went together. Okay, so Isaac is taking the wood on his back, And Abraham has got, the fire in one hand, and he's got this meat cleaver in the other hand. Okay. Now they're walking together here, and Isaac is no dummy, apparently. So in verse 7, Isaac says to Abraham, his father, "Father," he said, "here I am, my son." And he said, "Here is the fire and the wood, but where's the sheep for the offering here?" Now, notice there's one implement which Isaac leaves out of this, right? So it's like Isaac is looking around and saying, he's putting two and two together here. He says, okay, we have the fire and the wood. Isaac doesn't mention that meat cleaver that's in the guy's hand, right? That would have been the most scary part for Isaac, right? I mean, Isaac is beginning to realize exactly what that meat cleaver is going to be used for. And the two of them went together, and they came to the place that God had said to him. And Abraham built there an altar, and laid out the wood, and bound Isaac his son, placed him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham reached out his hand and took the cleaver to slaughter his son. And the Lord's messenger called out to him from the heavens and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here am I." And he said, "Do not reach out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, and you have not held back your son, your only one, from me." And Abraham raised his eyes, and saw, and look, a ram was caught in the thicket by the horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up as a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Yahweh Yireh, and said, as it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord there is sight." So that's what Yahweh Yireh means. It means, the note here says that it's kind of ambiguous. It could either mean Yahweh sees or Yahweh is seen. It doesn't know either one, but the way he translates it is, "On the mount of the Lord there is sight," in order to preserve that ambiguity there. Dude, I just don't understand this. Let's see what God has to say next, and see if it's any help for us to explain this, right? I mean, surely God can clear this up. And the Lord's messenger called out to Abraham once again from the heavens, and he said, "By my own self I swear, declares the Lord, that because you have done this thing, and have not held back your son, your only one, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens, and as the sand of the shore of the sea. Your seed shall take hold of its enemy's gate, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through your seed, because you have listened to my voice." Okay. The commentaries here says this is an interesting thing. I mean, we've heard this refrain over and over again. If you've read the book of Genesis, you've heard this refrain over and over again, right? That Abraham will be a blessing to all nations. He will, though his seed will be things. So this is the first time that God adds a little twist to it here. And what's the twist that God adds? There's a new thing that God has said here, which is different from every other time that God has talked about Abraham's seed. You shall take hold of your enemy's gate. This is talking about war. This is talking about what you're going to be doing in warfare. This is the only time that God mentions that the seed of Abraham will be a warlike people, and will have victory in war. And I don't think that's quite a thing. So in the next video, let me talk a little bit about this and why it's just so unbelievably puzzling to me.